Hi everyone, welcome to today's lecture. So today we will be talking about the second paper, and the reading is on writing a draft, right, and proofreading. So that's the final part, right, of the final sections of chapter 7, right. So try to read that. It's hard for me to um, discuss that too much, although I will talk about it a little bit later on, because they are just kind of exercises, right, um, that you're supposed to do individually, right, in order to kind of brainstorm in order to kind of narrow down your ideas, right? So that's something that you should definitely kind of carefully read and try to follow, especially if you're having difficulties putting your ideas together, right? But I will talk about that later on. I will also talk about two of the sample essays, right, in chapter 7, so I can kind of break down for you, you know, the examples, right, and how they're structuring their arguments in terms of proposing a solution. So we will talk about that. But before that, just a couple of announcements. And this has more to do with, since I've finished grading your papers, right? And everyone should have received their papers back with comments and grade. Um, and first off, if you gave me a Word document, right, you should upload. Well, when you get my email, right, you should upload the my attachments, right? Because if you're just reading my comments on the email, you won't really see the margin, the comments on the margins, right? So you have to upload the document into your computer, and then you'll be able to see all of my edits and my comments on the margins, right? Because I write a lot on the margins. So yeah, make sure you do that because I have my comments at the last page along with your grade, right? But then I also have more comments on the margins. But you can only see that if you upload your document, right? For those who gave me a PDF copy, obviously you know that I kind of handwritten my comments on the margins using my iPad, and so you're good. That's all the comments that I was able to give you, right? All right, so upload your Word document to see my comments, and then last name on your documents, right? When you upload your document, your essay in iLearn, try to save it with your last name um, on the document. Like on the first word of the document should be your last name, right? So that I can easily file it. And don't put it in parentheses or brackets, right? That was just an example that I used, but it's just your last name and then SA2, right? That's it. That's how you should save your document before uploading it. It makes things way easier for me. Um, okay, so upload a document. Some of you used way too many sources, and I kind of indicated that in your paper if you did so. Um, but I am only asking for three, right? Three required sources. One, um, one scholarly journal and two credible non-scholarly articles, right? Um, if you want to go over, try to maybe, because I mean, you can read like 10 articles, right? But don't use all of them, right? Just read as much as you can in order to inform yourself. But in order for you to have a focused kind of paper, right, you really only have to use three or four or five. I would say five or six should be the maximum number of sources that you should use, right, for your actual paper, right? And only include in the works cited page sources that you've quoted, right, or summarized, right, that you directly took information from. Don't, include all of the sources that you read, but some of them you didn't actually use, right? Um, so yeah, so any more than 6 sources in your works cited page, that's probably too much, and chances are that makes your paper kind of confusing. There's too many outside information, and try to kind of make sense of it just doesn't work, right? It doesn't help your paper, right? So limit your number of sources. Um, and titles, right? Titles, please try to give me, something other than essay one or argumentative essay or proposing a solution essay, right? Give me something, give me a title that kind of says something about your argument, right? About how you're going to solve a solution or solve a problem. Yeah, so be creative, but also make it so that it says something about your argument. All right, so for writing a draft, um, and my apologies, because I know I told you before that um, the online version of the St. Martin's Guide does not have page numbers, but they actually do. And I just kind of, I just noticed it today. If you go to the bottom, and then there's an arrow here that goes up and down, that reveals kind of a bar at the bottom, you'll see the page number. And I guess I had this down the whole time. That's why I thought, there wasn't any page numbers. So hopefully you've been able to navigate my lectures even if I'm not giving you page numbers, right? But now that I've figured that out, I will try to use page numbers to kind of indicate where I'm at, right? Sorry about that, and I hope I wish someone told me that before, but I don't know if you knew that also. Okay, so I'm on page 272, right? Writing a draft, and this is sort of brainstorming what a problem is, right? So here on this page it says ways in, right? What is the problem, right? So here, this is, like I said, right, this is an exercise that you're supposed to do on your own, and it's hard for me to kind of explain, how to do this, right? Because this differs individually, right, depending on what your topic is. Obviously, you have, but the idea here is to kind of, um, and I've said this, a few times already, to really have a good grasp of your problem, right? Obviously, this is proposing a solution, and if the reader has no good grasp of what the problem is, then the solution will fall kind of flat, right? What is it trying to solve, right? And so it's good to start with a problem, right? Um, and here it's giving you ideas, right, on how to think about a problem, right? So spend 10 minutes listing everything you know about the problem, write quickly, leaving judgment aside for the moment. After 10 minutes, you're up. After 10 minutes are up, you can review your list and highlight or star the most promising information. Right, so it's kind of telling you, right, to having read some articles perhaps about your issue, then just kind of start writing down, right, what are the problems, what are the different parts of the problem, right? And describe the problem, compare the problem to other similar problems, right? Connect the problem to other problems, analyze the problem, right? So kind of really have a good sort of understanding of the complexities, right? The nuances of the problem. And that's really the only way to kind of address the problem is if you or to give a solution, right, is if you have a good grasp on the problem. Um, so yeah, so that's kind of basically how you should sort of start approaching your paper, right? Right, and now that you've figured out what your problem is, right, then you'll want to start um, figuring out what the solutions are, right? And so you'll pretty much do the same thing, right? Just kind of brainstorm, write down, possible solutions that you've read about, that or use your instincts too, right? If you recognize a solution to a problem just based on your own knowledge of the world or whatever, right? Write that down, right? And just kind of narrow it down from there, right? Um, but there are different ways to kind of approach a solution, right? And here are some examples on page 274, right? How can I solve this problem, right? So there are different ways that you can kind of think about the problem, or you can think about the solution, right? You can either adapt a solution that has been tried or proposed for a similar problem. Right. The example is Smith's proposal for a national student exchange program is based on the successful international program. Right. So if your solution is something that has not been done before, right. So obviously you have no way of um, finding sources, right, that will give you evidence um, to support your solution, right. So you will want to find something similar that has been done before, right? Um, and use those sources, right, to kind of justify your solution, right? You're saying something that, oh, this has been done, even though my solution has not been done before. This solution for this other problem, right, has been done before, and it will work in the same way. And so I'm using this logic, I'm using this solution, right, to address my problem, right? So that's one way to kind of address, right, your solution that has not been done before. The second way is to focus on eliminating a cause or minimizing an effect of the problem, right? O'Malley's solution, this is the example, O'Malley's solution to stressful high-stakes exams is to eliminate the cause of the stress by inducing instructors to give more frequent low-stakes exams. Right, so focus on eliminating a cause or minimizing an effect of the problem. Right, so another way of approaching a solution is not necessarily to solve a problem completely, right? Because obviously that's a very difficult thing to do, maybe even impossible in certain cases, right? And so your approach might be to just minimize, right? Minimize the the, the problem, right? Or minimize the harmful effects of the problem. Um, and so yeah, the example here, right, on sort of O'Malley's example, to have more shorter exams than one long exam. Um, O'Malley is not necessarily solving all problems of stress, right, or productivity of students, right, but he thinks that by doing one thing, right, we might be able to lessen the stress, the anxiety of students um, um, while also improving a little bit, right, their productivity. So that's another way to approach a solution, right? Another one is to see the problem as part of a larger system and explore solutions to the system, right? So Figlio argues that changing high school start times will help improve student performance, right? So kind of connecting, right, smaller problems to kind of larger problems, right, is another way of approaching it. And another one is a focus on solving a small part of the problem, right? So Brownell and Frieden's solution to obesity is to reduce the consumption of sugared beverages through taxation, right? So um, focusing on a small part of a big problem, right? So the big problem obviously is obesity, right? And the epidemic of obesity um, in um, in America, right? And that's a very complex problem. There are different sort of aspects of American culture and American life that that feeds, pun intended, that feeds into that obesity, that epidemic of obesity, right? One is, that our idea of freedom, right, in this country is obviously a capitalistic one, and so our idea of freedom is linked to the idea of consumption. The more we consume, the more free we think we are, right? So, um, and so that is, and not just the consumption of food, right? Consumption of any kinds of materials, right? Um, and yeah, and so that is the kind of, that's a very basic American, it's a basic part of the American culture, right? The idea of freedom and consumption. Um, and so yeah, so the problem of obesity is very, very big. And so what the sample essay is addressing here is a small part of it, which is to address the consumption of sugared beverages, right, through taxation. So that is a very specific kind of way of addressing a small part of this otherwise very big problem, right? Um, so those are just a few examples, right, of how you might be able to approach um, your your solution, right? So it's really important for you to read all of the different examples here, because one example might not fit what you're trying to do, right? And so if you read all of this, you'll find the different ways that the authors approach proposing a solution, right, in their papers. And and so if you go to page 276, right, I won't talk too much about this, but I just want you to pay attention to, so 276, there's a box here, right? It says weighs in. To draft a refutation, right, and drafting a concession. And here you have templates, right, of how to sort of um, how to open up the conversation of, or how to open up, right, your refutation. And I want you to, to feel free to use these templates, right? It's not plagiarism if you're just using the kind of the 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 structure, right? And obviously, you're just going to fill in the blanks with your own topic. The first example here is some people think we can't afford to do X, but it would cost only X amount of dollars to put my solution in place compared to X amount of dollars, the cost of doing nothing, implementing an alternative solution, right? So this is kind of a semi-blank template, right, where you can kind of use to open up your paragraph, right, on refutation or concession. So feel free to use any of these templates that might work for how you're framing your counter argument, right? And last but not least, at the very end of the chapter, which is page 282, right? Here you have, if you have the online version, you have hyperlinks here to OWL Purdue, to Grammarly, a guide to editing and proofreading, right? So Grammarly is a grammar app that helps you um, sort of that helps correct, right, certain grammar issues. I am not against any kind of, grammar apps or um, even autocorrect, right? Please use autocorrect. Make sure that it's on, because that will just you know highlight the small kind of mistakes that we do, right? Obviously, we're not perfect, and we I still, I depend a lot on autocorrect to kind of for me to see the small mistakes, right? Because it's usually the small mistakes that make the paper, if there's a lot of them, right, throughout the paper, that makes it very distracting. Um, and so, yeah, so please use autocorrect. Please use whatever grammar app that will help you sort of fix or correct your grammar. Um, but also know that these apps are not perfect, right? And so use them as a secondary tools, right? Even for um, for your works cited page, right? For your citations, feel free to use citation apps and all these things, but just know that these are not sort of perfect machines, and so they might do things kind of um, they have their limits, right? So it's still good to be aware of what you're doing and then using the apps as a secondary tool, right? Don't depend too much on them. Is really my point. So let's now go back to the two. I'm going to talk about two sample essays, one by David Figlio, which is starting high school later, and then I'll also talk about Kelly Brownell and Thomas Frieden's Ounces of Prevention, the Public Policy Case for Taxes on Sugared Beverages. Right, so I will be talking about those two articles. So let's start with the Figlio um, article, and it's called Starting High School Later. Right. So I'm just going to talk about, let me just read the first two paragraphs, right, and then I'll talk about what he's doing here. So many proposals for improving student performance involve very costly interventions. And while quite a few of these costly interventions surely pass benefit cost tests, they can be extremely challenging, politically or financially, to implement. One possible source of low hanging fruit involves starting school later in the day for middle and high school students. This would permit adolescents to sleep later and therefore arrive to school more ready to learn. Right. So let's start. So that's the first paragraph, and the last sentence of this paragraph is his thesis. Right. So this would permit, or I would say the last two sentences, right? One possible source of low-hanging fruit involves starting school later in the day for, so that's the solution, right, is starting. So it's the last two sentences of the first paragraph. Starting school later in the day for middle and high school students, this would permit, right, adolescents to sleep later and therefore arrive at school more ready to learn, right? So that's the thesis. And then paragraph 2, why start school later for adolescents, right? The answer rests in our biology. Circadian rhythms influence our sleep patterns, and the degree of light on the outside of our eyelids affects our melatonin secretion and feelings of alertness or fatigue. As children enter puberty, their nocturnal melatonin products shift several hours later than what occurred when they were younger or when they become adults. As a consequence, the American Academy of Pediatrics suggests that adolescents sleep until at least 8 a.m. but thanks to a wide range of factors, half of all US high schools start by that time. Given this discordance between natural sleep rhythms and school start times for adolescents, it's no surprise that students lose as much as 2 hours of sleep per night when they start school in the fall relative to the summer. Right. So notice that the first paragraph here is actually really short, right? There's almost no context to the thesis, right? And I always tell you guys to to make sure that there's a problem, a clear problem in the introduction, blah blah blah, right? But if you think about it, the second paragraph is actually that context, right? So this is just kind of a stylistic choice on his part, right? Where he sort of starts off straight into the thesis and then gives us context in the paragraph after. This is not wrong, right? Because he's still providing us everything that we need to know, right? He just kind of flipped it, right? So this is purely stylistic. And you can kind of flip this, right? You can make paragraph 2 the first part of paragraph 1, and then that will be a kind of like a longer introduction, right? So that's, don't be too, you can do that if you want. If you're not sort of comfortable playing around with the structure yet, then just go with my suggestion, which is to give us context in the introduction before giving us your thesis, right? Also in the second paragraph, notice how he has in-text citations here, right? So when I say, I hope you know what I mean by in-text citation, right? Because some of you, have commented in your papers that that you did not put in-text quotations. So in-text quotations are those parentheses within at the end of the sentence, right? Where you included something from your source, right? So that's the parentheses where you include the last name of the author and then the page number, if there's a page number, right? So here, see that there's an in-text citation. One is from Arendt. The other one is from Karskaden et al. Et al. Just means there are others. There are other writers. So notice that there's in-text citations here without any quotations. So that means that he's summarizing some of these facts, some of these research, right? He's summarizing them, he's not quoting them, but he's still including an in-text citation, right? So that's the thing. Whether you're quoting from them or you're summarizing them or paraphrasing them, you have to include in-text citation. When you're in doubt, if you're not sure whether you should put in-text citation or not, just put in-text citation. You're better off, including too many in-text citations than not enough in-text citations. Okay, so that's that. Also, I won't go through the rest of it, right? Please read it so you can learn from it. But if you notice, he is not quoting anywhere in this essay, right? And I always tell you guys to make sure you're quoting and this and that, right? Again, this is a stylistic choice, right? Also a format choice. He has a different way of structuring his essay here, and obviously he is using outside sources because he has a long works cited page, and he has in-text citations, which means he's just summarizing and maybe paraphrasing from his sources, right? He's not quoting. But for our paper, I want to see quotations, right? I want to see, because, once you've graduated and you go to your own fields and write your own, papers, and then you can kind of play around, right, with different formats. But for the sake of this paper, everything has to be MLA format, and I just want you to learn sort of the basic ways of argumentation, and so we will stick to one style and one format, right? Which is MLA format and using direct quotes, right, from your sources, right? So if you want to see examples of the direct quotes, see the first example by Patrick O'Malley. Yeah, so you can still learn a lot from how he's sort of breaking down the solution and breaking down the problem, right? So please read it, but notice that he's also not using any quotes, right? So don't follow that part. And the last thing that I want to talk about this sample essay is the works cited page, right? So this is how the works cited page should look like. So the works cited page should be its own in a separate page, right? Don't just include it in the last page of your conclusion or whatever, right? It has to be its own separate page, right? That's the first thing. And yeah, just copy this structure, right? So it says works cited page on top. You actually don't have to make it bold. This one is on bold. You don't have to do that. And then, for example, here, right, the first line, the first line of the source, right, is kind of sticking out, and then the rest of the lines on the bottom are indented, right? So that should be how you format. That is the MLA format, right? And the purpose of that is so when we see the in-text quotation here there's an in-text. If you look at the conclusion, right, paragraph 12 of this essay, the in-text citation here is the last in-text citation is by Pope, right? So I see Pope there, and if I want to look at Pope, I just go to the works cited page, and Pope is immediately visible because it's sort of popping out, right, of the line. So that's the kind of that's the practical reason, right, for this format, right, so that it's easy access to your sources, right? So and obviously this works cited page is not double spaced. It's for the sake of our paper, everything is double spaced, right? Here they're only double spacing per source, right? But in our paper, every line is double spaced, obviously. All right. So the second sample essay is by Kelly Brownell and Thomas Frieden, called Ounces of Prevention, the Public Policy Case for Taxes on Sugared Beverages, right? So in terms of format, right, this is also this is not an MLA format. This is a different kind of format, right? And so you don't see quotations here. You see summaries, you see kind of references, right? And so that's just its own format, right? And then if you look at the works cited page, it doesn't say works cited page, it says references. And then the references are numbered, right? So you don't want to do that. You want to use the first one that we talked about, which is an MLA format, which is works cited page and then the different like indentations, right? Yeah, so this is just a different format. So for the most part, just keep doing what you've been doing, right? Unless I corrected you in your in my comments, right? Right, so let me read the first paragraph here. The obesity epidemic has inspired calls for public health measures to prevent diet-related diseases. One controversial idea is now the subject of public debate: food taxes. Right? 40 states already have small taxes on sugared beverages and snack foods, but in the past year, Maine and New York have proposed large taxes on sugared beverages, and similar discussions have begun in other states. The size of the taxes, their potential for generating revenue and reducing consumption, and vigorous opposition by the beverage industry have resulted in substantial controversy. Right? Because excess consumption of unhealthful foods underlies many leading causes of death, food taxes at local, state, and national levels are likely to remain part of political and public health discourse. Right. So notice the different way that the thesis is framed. Right. It's not very direct. Right. It's merely or it's well qualified, right? Because the problem and the solution is kind of complicated, um, because the solution is already ongoing, right? And so the problem is already well established, right? And the solutions have already been ongoing, although it's not at the level yet that they want. Um, And so what they're saying is that those problem and the solution are causing a controversy, right? Conflict between them. Um, and so the thesis here, because excess consumption of health food underlies many leading causes of death, um, food taxes at local, state, and national levels are likely to remain part of political and public health discourse, right? So they're only saying here that there is a well-established problem, and there are solutions already being put forward, right? And his role, their role here, the writer's role, is really not to propose new solutions, right? Is but saying that they just want these solutions to be continued, right? So they're just sort of justifying an ongoing solution, right? So that's another way, right, to kind of frame your solution, because obviously um, like not all of us can come up with completely original solutions, right? Most of our solutions are derived from something else, um, and so you can just frame it right, to where you're saying I'm just helping, right, justify the solution by talking about it, right? Okay. So that's the thesis. And then let's look at paragraph 2, right? So I just want to read the first sentence. Sugar sweetened beverages, soda sweetened with sugar, corn syrup, or other caloric sweeteners, and other carbonated and uncarbonated drinks, such as sports and energy drinks, may be the single largest driver of obesity, um, of the obesity epidemic, right? So this is another thing that I have commented on some of your papers, that um, there is no clear opening statement, right? So every body paragraph, right, of your paper should have a clear opening statement, right? So an opening statement is just a statement um, summarizing your argument for that specific paragraph, right? So notice here, sugar sweetened beverages may be the single largest driver of the obesity epidemic, right? So that's part of the argument, right? That this is what sugar sweetened beverages do. And so he's just summarizing that, and he's actually very specific too in terms of what specific kinds of sugared beverages, right? So soda sweetened with sugar, other caloric, sports, energy drinks, etc. Right. Um, so I want you to have a state opening statement that speaks of your argument before you then go to use your sources, right? So notice the second sentence here. A recent meta-analysis found that, and then they go on to their source, right? So don't go straight into your sources, right? So because that takes away from your argument, it takes away from your own voice as a writer, and it kind of favors your source, and you don't want to do that because this is about your paper, not about the source, right? You're only using the source as an evidence, right, to back you up. Okay, and then the third paragraph here, taxes on tobacco products have been highly effective in reducing consumption, and data indicate that higher prices also reduce soda consumption, right? So again, with that opening statement, where now I'm going to be talking about, comparing soda consumption to tobacco consumption, right? So because tobacco has already been banned, or not banned, but has been highly taxed, right? So that's why less people perhaps buy cigarettes now, because they're very expensive, and that's because of the increase in taxes, right? So that's their way also of pushing people to consume to smoke less, right? So they're comparing that to the consumption of sugared beverages. All right, so again, a good kind of opening statement that introduces us to the argument, right? And then paragraph 4, again here, the increasing affordability of soda and the decreasing affordability of fresh fruits and vegetables probably contributes to the rise in obesity in the United States, right? So again, with the opening statement, right? So there are different aspects to the solution that they're addressing here, paragraph by paragraph, right? And then let's move on to paragraphs 5 and 6, right? So paragraph 5 is a refutation, right? So some argue that government should not interfere in the market and that products and prices will change as consumers demand for healthful food, but several considerations support government action, right? So some might argue that government should not interfere, right? So that's the first acknowledgement of objections, right? And they're refuting this by saying that let's see, your diet-related diseases also cause society in terms of, right. So they're saying that the government, right, should not interfere with issues of food consumption and things like that, right? But they're saying here that that's actually that they're so that's the argument, right, that they are considering. But their counter argument then is to say that in fact the government already sort of interferes in people's lives, because when they get sick, right, from being obese or from whatever reason, right, the government through Medicare and Medicaid or whatever governmental sort of agency, right, the government already helps, right, people who get sick, right, and use tax money to Medicare and Medicaid come from our taxes, right? And so the government is already involved in the health of its citizens, right? And so why not also use the government as a way to implement certain ways to prevent diseases of its citizens, right? And then paragraph 6. Objections have certainly been raised that such a tax would be regressive, that food taxes are not comparable to tobacco or alcohol taxes because people must eat to survive, that it is unfair to single out one type of food for taxation, and that the tax will not solve the obesity problem, right? So this is refutation number 2, which is saying that we should not compare food to cigarettes, right? But then the counter argument here is saying that or not to compare cigarettes to food because food is a necessity, right? But they're saying here that sugared food is actually not a necessity, right? So it's kind of like tobacco. It's not a necessity. People can survive without soda or without energy drink, right? I hope. um, so yeah, so we have two refutations here, and obviously this paper is very long, and your paper is short, and so you do not need to provide two counter arguments, right? You can only do one, right? As long as you have at least one counter argument, right? And then paragraph 7 and 8 here are paragraph 7 is a concession, right? So they have two paragraphs on that refutes or that refutes objections, right? And then they have one paragraph that concedes to objections, right? So that's a little too much for us. But these are just examples of how to do that, right? Yeah, so I think between this essay and the first essay by Patrick O'Malley, not the one that I just read, but the one that I talked about last week, these are actually really good examples of how to kind of structure your paper, right? But obviously, you want to use quotations as evidence, right? I think, right, so I think that's all that I want to talk about, right, for this lecture. And yeah, I think that's it. And feel free to email me if you have any questions or set up a meeting with me if you want a one-on-one office hours meeting.